Cousins will discuss. Next we've got Jack Craw and Dr. Nick Waipara. So Jack and Nick, warm welcome. And Mel's, you're joining them. Thank you. Right. Next little while is yours. Round about 10 minutes or so for presentation and then time for questions. Warm welcome, Jack. Who's going to lead? Nick? Jack? Nick.
Kia ora tātou, ko Nick Waipara tēnei, ko ronga whakaata te iwi, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'd like to mihi the welcome that we had this morning and yourselves as hearing this kōrero today, and of course mihi te kawaramaki and te wārana for his kaitiakitanga and wisdom in this serious issue. So I'm here today as the co-author of the report. The Waitakere Ranges Kauri Health Report follows a methodology I co-developed with Landcare Research to monitor the distribution of Phytophthora agathaticida and its causal disease expression and the impact of kauri health within the park. These surveys follow a national best practice standard called the National Vegetation Surveys, which were previously developed by Landcare Research for the long-term monitoring of forest health and population dynamics across New Zealand. This type of surveillance, which uses aerial ground truthing and laboratory-based diagnostics, is best practice, scientifically peer-reviewed, and is conducted across the regional park kauri network every 5 years. The key findings of this report was that our field-based ground truthing surveys resulted in a total of over 22,477 trees being assessed, which resulted in soil sampling for laboratory-based diagnostics at Plant and Food Research to detect the pathogen and confirm the disease symptoms were actually caused by Phytophthora agathaticida. This is the largest systematic kauri dieback field survey ever undertaken to date in New Zealand, and is in fact one of the largest native forest disease surveys ever undertaken in New Zealand. So I'd like to tautoko and acknowledge the ground teams and those people and the experts in the team that undertook this very arduous but robust work. The Waitakere Ranges Regional Park now represents the most heavily infected kauri dieback infected area currently recorded in New Zealand. The diagnosed distribution of kauri dieback relative to the kauri area within the park has more than doubled, from 7.9% of kauri infected in 2011 to over 18% infected in 2016. Of most concern to me and others is that given kauri is a keystone ecosystem engineering species, the larger distinct areas of kauri forest within the park, which means they're over 5 hectares, in those areas we're now approaching 60% of those big kauri areas being infected with the pathogen. This is a real threat to the kauri as an ecosystem plant, but it also means an eventual consequential loss to the co-evolved species that are ecologically selected and contained within the kauri ecosystem. The potential loss to a unique gene pool and species composition must be considered as a high threat if this pathogen is not contained. With the increasing infection, experts such as Professor Peter DeLange, you might have heard this week, and others before him, for example, have concurred we are set to lose entire stands of kauri in the park if this continues. And the symptomology data that has been generated in this report could lead to a reclassification of the extinction threat status for New Zealand kauri under the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. This red list of threatened species is the world's most comprehensive inventory of the global conservation status of plant and animal species. It uses a set of criteria to evaluate the extinction threat of thousands of species and subspecies globally. So the fact that this may be reconsidered, when it was considered 5 years ago but was wasn't put on the list, the fact that this potentially is going to be reconsidered shows the gravity of the robust data that has been presented in my report. The highest risk vector for Phytophthora agathodicida is the movement into distinct locations is soil disturbance associated with human activity, for example, the spore movement on visitor tracks. As we reported 5 years ago in our original report in 2011, the 2017 report again demonstrates the correlation between Kauri dieback zones and their proximity to the track network. 71% of Kauri dieback zones are within 50 metres of the track, and you can refer to the full report to see that data. Of 172 visitor tracks within the park, 108 have Kauri along them. Of these 108 tracks with Kauri, 51 intersect Kauri dieback zones, with a further 13 now intersecting high-risk spread zones. So 25% of the Kauri area along tracks is now affected with infection and Kauri dieback, with a further 9% at great risk. So these are the areas around that risk profile. You can look at page 16 in our report. The problem comes down to the basic fundamental biology of this Phytophthora, which is highly adept at surviving in soil. So far, its viability or its longevity is up to 8 years and counting. So that means it can survive in soil for at least 8 years, and we are still germinating it out of those soil samples 8 years later. So next year, if it's viable, it'll be 9 years. So that really shows a real inherent problem with this biology for us to manage it. It has a tough outer wall that enables it to survive in soil for many years, so it's akin to a seed bank. It is highly resistant to many aggressive chemical treatments and can tolerate highly acidic and alkaline soils, as well as long periods without its host, without water and without nutrients. So this is another issue with the fundamental biology which we do know about. Human-assisted soil-borne movement of the pathogen is the number one issue for managing the disease, as you can see with our data. It also presents many imminent risks of introduction to the remaining healthy stands in the forests, both within West Auckland and further beyond. So this lack of containing the oospore is a very wicked management problem. We have isolated this pathogen, this spore, from track soils, people's footwear, vehicle tyres, mud-soiled clothing and soiled equipment. It is moving within the forest due to these activities. It is hitching a ride literally within the soil profile. While the fundamental understanding of the pathogen is ongoing, we do know the life cycle of agathodicida and its close association with survival within soil disturbance and soil movement. That is a clear scientific fact, which has been published and peer-reviewed. The current hygiene measures in place since 2008 have failed to contain the movement of the pathogen. The low and, let's face it, declining compliance on the park with visitors in the cleaning stations and footwear and cleaning equipment presents a serious biosecurity risk to healthy Kauri. So the lack of containment through non-compliance is a major issue. In 2012, protection areas and closed tracks were implemented to try and arrest the spread of the disease into undetected healthy stands. But again, evidence of both off-track non-permitted activities and people continuing to use closed tracks will have enabled further human vectoring into our most precious remaining stands of the Kauri in the ecosystem, and including into areas where it has not been detected to date. The ongoing increased infection rates will also be contributing to an accelerated rate of spore production in all infected root zones. The more infected trees, the more spores will be being produced, allowing the inoculum thresholds to significantly increase across all Kauri dieback zones. This means the soils are becoming highly contaminated, thus presenting a much higher biosecurity risk than we had 5 years ago, and even compromise our current knowledge and hygiene measures. For example, at that terrible contamination rate, we may be looking at the disinfectants not working at the current dose and application methodology. Epidemiological science, which has been peer-reviewed across soil-borne diseases, including Phytophthora agathodicida, shows there is a critical inoculum threshold which, once reached, can be a tipping point and may start to overwhelm host plants that were formerly resilient to infection. We are now seeing that level of disease inoculum being produced in Waitakere kauri soils. The pathogen is now highly entrenched in many catchments. Of greater concern, it was predicted and warned by our Australian peer reviewers, Professor Giles Hardy and Dr. Joanna Young, many years ago, and continued to review our work, that these high inoculum densities may allow a spillover to other non-kauri hosts in the forest. That means a host range expansion. Work undertaken by myself, Landcare Research, Dr. Stan Balgard, and our successful MSc graduate who got an A+ last year, clearly showed that agathodicida can infect and be hosted by other unrelated species in the Ngāhere. So I want to make that quite clear, it is not monospecific. Most phytophthorologists will attest that this type of organism is really host-specific, it's really monospecific. We are clearly starting to see evidence of other species at risk from this pathogen, particularly in areas where the pathogen has reached high inoculum levels in the soil. For example, Mangaroa Ridge and Huia. As the science progresses, we must be nimble and strong in our biosecurity risk assessments and our adaptive management strategies. With this information, I conclude many parts of the Waitakere Ranges are now at a perilous tipping point for kauri, but other plant hosts as well. That declining ecological resilience and the compromised root health of the entire kauri ecosystem will also lead to it being more vulnerable to other environmental pressures, such as synergistic pests and diseases, such as another Phytophthora multivora, which is present in the forest. But not only that, kauri kōrot and droughts, climate change and other environmental tipping points. So this pathogen is weakening the forest to other stressors. That's what we also call an ecosystem tipping point, which we see in many systems in New Zealand, including our aquatic ones. So I concur with other experts, such as Peter DeLang and many other of my colleagues I've been working with for 15 years in Phytophthora research, is the fact we are going to lose many kauri from many stands at the projected rates of disease expression. And given there is no cure, this is a very serious biosecurity issue requiring all urgent measures beyond the status quo, which have clearly failed. We don't need another survey or wait another 5 years to know this. The evidence and data is factual and rigorous and peer-reviewed. We also don't want the ongoing human-assisted spread to endanger other healthy kauri stands within the Waitakeres and beyond, such as our largest kauri forest, the Hanua Ranges. I'll conclude my presentation now with a whakatauki. Ko te kauri he whakaruruhau mō te iwi katoa, kia toitu he whenua, kia toitu he kauri. Kia ora and thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Nick. So we'll go on to Jack, are you adding to this? We'll take both and then I'm sure there'll be questions. Jack.
Yes, Madam Chair, I intend to have a short presentation.
We've got it here. Do you want to start and we'll...
Oh, okay, thank you.
We'll just make sure we've got it, Jack. Did you get Dan? What's it called? We'll just have a slight technical glitch here. Did it not? Was it emailed?
So I'll email it to you today.
Was it
To you, to Penny or to me?
Oh, well, I haven't emailed it, but I will email it.
Oh, okay.
can't
Sorry,
find
we
it.
were just having a little panic
Oh, I'm
thinking,
sorry.
hang on a minute, we might be getting something on the screen and we haven't. Phew. Okay, we're in your hands, Jack.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Your Worship, fellow councillors and other committee members. My name is Jack Craw. I was the Biosecurity Manager here from 2003 to 2014 for 11 years. When I retired, I'm currently consulting on kauri dieback and other matters, but specifically with kauri dieback with regard to MPI and also to NZTA regarding the Puhoi to Warkworth Highway. So I'm keeping my hand in. Firstly, may I say I seek not to lay any blame on any party for the crisis situation that now confronts Council. Indeed, I've previously been part of decisions made in the name of carrier protection, some of which have proven over time to be either insufficient or ineffective. The management of carrier dieback nationally has been led by Auckland Regional Council and Auckland Council. Council has done more, far more in fact, than any other management agency in terms of applied research, adaptive management, community education, aerial and ground surveillance, development and implementation of phytosanitary measures, track user behaviour surveys, feral pig control and other necessary work. Apart from research supplied by the Crown Research Institute and universities, Council has essentially had to go it alone in terms of actual management of infected carry forest. Council can hold its head high. Almost all of its adaptive management techniques have been taken up by DOC, other councils and the National Carry Dieback Program. And Council has always, in my view, always made the best decisions based on the current available knowledge. The Waitakere Ranges is the only place in New Zealand with carry dieback that has had comprehensive surveillance completed twice. So it is the only place in which comprehensive data exists to demonstrate the effectiveness or otherwise of management programs, i.e. we now have much more knowledge. In July 2002, 15 areas of non-disease carry were closed to the public in order to protect them. It is disappointing that no empirical data has been provided on track user behaviour, particularly on the closed tracks. However, the information provided by Principal Ranger Stephen Bell in the staff report can, in my view, be relied upon entirely because, i.e. that the use of the closed tracks remains high, depressingly so, but I'm sure Stephen is correct. It is also disappointing that no in-depth study was able to be done on disease vectoring versus track condition. That's commented upon on page 17 of the staff report. Obviously, because muddy tracks are much more likely to be vectors, and it might have given Council a bit more guidance on, the rate at which they have to do up tracks, improve tracks. But it does have a very coarse evaluation that it shows a correlation between disease transmission and poor track condition. However, even this evaluation offers evidence enough that poorly maintained, i.e. muddy tracks, cannot be made safe. You cannot make a muddy track safe and should always be closed when they are muddy. Nevertheless, the data provides us clear evidence that the management regime to date has been almost a total failure. Council has failed. The protection zones policy has failed completely. This is due to people not complying with signs and rules. Council is now at a crisis crossroads. Clearly a lot more needs to be done. Otherwise there will be no carry left in 30 to 40 years. The scenic values, the ecological, cultural and tourism values will all be lost and future generations will curse us all. Turning now to the options. It's disappointing to see there's no inclusion of the risk analysis done by the biosecurity team on the various options. I've just been handed the report on that. Councillors may not have seen it, so I guess you're probably a bit of a loss. But anyway, option 1 dooms the ranges entirely, of course, and option 2 also dooms the ranges as it has been proven that the status quo has failed. Option 3 doesn't really, in my view, pass any basic test of logic. It assumes that closing more tracks will somehow engender better behaviour in track users, when clearly this approach has not worked to date. Nowhere is it explained how closing more tracks will achieve better behaviour. Indeed, it seems more logical that users that enter the ranges, faced with fewer track options, will be more likely to break these rules. Paragraph 36 of the report claims that closure will reduce risks of disease spread, but this claim is contradicted by the staff report. Option 4 might be of some use if the high risk and medium risk tracks, that's those categories, contain all infected tracks. I'm not sure, it doesn't say that. I think what it means is only tracks with no disease. Sorry, I'll start again. If only tracks with no disease were allowed to be kept open, I think that would be okay, an okay option. It doesn't describe that in the report. Of these two categories, if those two categories, medium risk and high risk, exclude some infected tracks, then option 4 would surely fail. In other words, we have to close every track that is infected. If closure of all infected tracks was done, and then side tracks from those uninfected tracks that are diseased would have to be made impassable by depositing tree trunks, etc., or some other way that you could find to make those tracks impassable. In other words, you could leave uninfected tracks open, provided you could establish that they were uninfected, and any infected tracks that lead to and from them would have to be made impassable. Now, I know some work has been done, but a lot more needs to be done about physically making those tracks impassable. That would be expensive, but it would be achievable. It would also need to be accompanied by remote electronic monitoring of all closed tracks. This will be inexpensive and relatively achievable. Remote monitoring would act as a deterrent, because if people who are on the tracks knew that those tracks were being remotely monitored, and there's a number of techniques we can do now. It doesn't have to be just, camera phones. There's a whole lot of electronic methods that can be used that are extremely cheap and effective. If people knew that those measures were in place, then I believe that they should be trialled in association with keeping open uninfected tracks. Option 5, i.e. immediate closure of all tracks to the public with track reopening as they are made safe, presents the best option for preventing further spread. It would not only immediately cause a dramatic reduction in track use overall, you'd still have non-compliers, but if it's monitored, I think you'd get a lot less non-compliance. But it not only immediately cause a dramatic reduction in track use, but it will also lower the use of the high-risk tracks. It would also focus council immediately on installation of compulsory, i.e. walk-through cleaning stations. These are the cleaning stations that people can't avoid. They have to walk through them. Briefly, I'd like to address the matter of the controlled area notice under Section 131 of the Biosecurity Act. This allows for additional movement controls to be implemented, and those controls can be as narrow or as wide-ranging as council desires. The report is incorrect in its statement that an application for a controlled area declaration has to be made to the Ministry of Primary Industries. Section 131(2) clearly states that a declaration can be made by a management agency. Auckland Council is the management agency for the Auckland Regional Pest Management Plan and also of the proposed RPMP. I table a copy of Section 131, which quite clearly says that a management agency can impose a controlled area notice. In addition, to confirm this, the current Regional Pest Management Plan already contains a controlled area, which is the Hauraki Gulf, which was created by the Auckland Regional Council in 1999 under Section 17.2 of the Regional Pest Management Plan. I table the relevant extract from the RPMP, which states that. In fact, it actually states here, during 1998-99, the ARC declared the Hauraki Gulf and all of its islands a controlled area under the Biosecurity Act, blah, blah, blah. So I'm at a loss to explain why Council feels it needs to go to MPI for that matter. I urge Council to immediately consult with those ratepayers living in the ranges and adjacent to the ranges and other affected parties to agree on the elements that are to be included in the controlled area notice. This need not be onerous. In my view, all it needs to include is soil and anything containing soil. In fact, the whole idea of a controlled area notice is simply to create an offence for those who bring in soil from outside. It's a very simple matter. And I think in paragraph 5 of the agenda item, it says here that the council has the potential to do these things. It should say has the powers to do these things, which they clearly do. Also, paragraph 6 of the that refers to the proposed RPMP refers to program options that have not been decided upon, nor likely to be decided upon for many months, and not likely to be implemented within 12 months. So I don't think it's appropriate for council to say, well, we can just leave it to the RPMP, because it could be 12 months before anything meaningful is done. Paragraph 8 is contradictory. Council cannot both support the principles of the Rahui and then leave tracks open for an unspecified time. I thought that was quite an inappropriate use of words there. Recommendation A, it says the proposed RPMP will not be operable for many months, but it contains excellent measures for the Hauraki Gulf, but not for elsewhere, other than creating a fence to spread carry diapig in the region. As the disease cannot be readily or immediately be detected on footwear, this measure offers no legal protection for the rangers. The proposed RPMP says it's an offence to spread the disease, but how would you know? A controlled area notice would say it would be an offence to spread soil within that area that has been defined. So that's a much more appropriate and a workable and enforceable measure. As to how you would deal with an option 5, council can authorise any person or persons or group of persons to be exempt from the track closure. This would obviously include parks and biosecurity staff, scientists, and all those who council can reasonably expect to comply with phytosanitary and access measures. And this could quite clearly include concessionaires, because the studies done by biosecurity in parks in the past indicated that concessionaires have excellent behaviour because they know their concession relies upon them obeying the rules. And so compliance by concessionaires and their clients has been excellent. It's the locals you've got to worry about, the dog walkers. The data has been produced. The dog walkers, the runners, the locals, that are the problem. So I believe that this council report contains too many deficiencies to be credible as a basis for making a decision with regards to option 3. I recommend that council, number 1, immediately close all tracks in Waitakere ranges to all persons other than those that are authorised by council. 2, as quickly as practicable, complete the determination of the disease status of all tracks if it hasn't been done. 3, make all infected tracks impassable and implement remote electronic monitoring of those infected tracks. 4, reopen tracks only when they have been determined to be uninfected and access to infected side tracks prevented. And 5, restore the feral pig program to its former intensity. And in conclusion, Madam Chair, may I say council in the past has always provided great political leadership in responding to the needs of Kauri and the Kauri management, indeed. It's time for council to now take the very, very hard but necessary decision to ensure that Kauri remains. I believe that the community will accept that they need to make a small and temporary personal sacrifice for the greater ecological, cultural and historic good of the Kauri in Waitakere. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack, can I just, actually it would be really good to ask that both of those presentations be made available to us, and particularly the recommendations that you put forward, Jack, that would be useful. I'm just aware of time. We've still got 2 presentations to go and it's after 11:30. We've got a huge agenda. So I will ask if there are genuine questions of clarification. We've probably got time for 2. Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Clow, you were in first. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you all for the presentations. I want to pose my question directly to Nick. It's always a privilege to work with you, and over the last decade I've certainly, as someone who knew nothing about this, just been so impressed with the work that you've put forward. I want to just ask a couple of questions in and around your report that is here. In the first version you didn't include, and that was last year's version, you didn't include recommendations. Can you just talk me through these recommendations and why in the second version you felt the need for those recommendations?
Oh, kia ora, Christine, through the chair. The first report was purely the technical disease distribution, and it was the mere data of where the disease was and wasn't and what we'd done. But we did feel that we were asked to then, how would you implement management given the data that was collected during that field program? And clearly identify some of the biosecurity risks that are emanating out of that report. So it was to give a steer on what areas we needed to do to contain that ooze spore movement. So the management recommendations were, I guess, to give council and us, our biosecurity team and parks team, the areas that were clearly showing to be an issue for the lack of containment of the spores. So we added in extra recommendations to support the data. So I guess a lot of scientists' papers, it's all very well producing the graphs, the data, but if you don't have a discussion at the end, or the so what, then it probably just languishes on a shelf, which you often see with science papers.
That is the great risk, and when you look at the stats, they're just overwhelmingly sad. So,
and the other, I've just finished one more, the other thing was the external peer reviewers told us you need to put some serious recommendations. One of our main peer reviewer was highly concerned to read that data and thought we need to bring it up and really showcase that issue. So it was the external reviewer that said to do that too.
So it was peer reviewed, the external reviewer required that of it, And without putting you on the spot, when you look at the recommendations which are on your page 22, 23, how does that reconcile with the recommendations that are being put before councillors today and members of the IMSB?
I think the analysis, for example, what a controlled area notice would look like to support closure, or closing areas or closing tracks, and that analysis is missing because we need to know the feasibility on what that would look like in terms of a job size, the management, the costs, the implications of doing options 4 and 5. And I don't think options 4 and 5 will be successful unless it has a legislative tool to actually prohibit those unauthorised accesses and unpermitted activities in the park. So I think the options need some more work based on the report.
So, yeah, because I felt quite inadequate when I was reading this report. I didn't feel that I was really in a position to be able to make a decision on that. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Casey.
My question's actually been asked.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's great. Councillor Clow.
Thank you, guys. Humans are getting pretty bad rap on this. Can you just give some feedback on feral pigs, feral cats, stoats, rats, who are just zooming around all over the place, even at night when we're all asleep and there's hardly any humans there? And they're pretty hard to actually monitor, obviously, pretty hard to get the information, but how bad are they compared to the humans who seem to be getting a pretty bad rap here? And obviously you've got proven science here, but that's my first question. Can you give any feedback on that? And I suppose related to that is the bait lines as well.
Well, firstly, pigs don't fly, so the introduction of soil on people's shoes going out of the Waitakere Ranges to like Waiheke Island or the Hanuas or Kaipariki Kauri parks is an extreme risk that other vectors don't warrant. We have had, and I'll let Jack answer that in terms of the feral pig program, but feral pigs are a major ground disturbance factor in the forest, and that's why there was a former eradication program underway to reduce feral animal numbers, particularly feral pigs. Anything that moves soil will move the pathogen. The pathogen, the number of movements will depend on how much soil is actually moved. So obviously the smaller the creature and the smaller the amount of soil it can move. Humans are clearly moving kilos and kilos and kilos of soil through the park. But we are not discounting other vectors, but they are, and our feral our biosecurity program to reduce feral animals in the park needs to also be maintained. So the great work of Ark in the Park and other conservation efforts within the area, reducing those feral numbers will indeed add to the protection. But it's that human management issue
Thanks,
that's
Nick.
the
I think
number
we
one
just-
in the room.
Sorry, we just
Okay,
really...
so the second question
Just
then
hang on,
leading into that.
hang
Yep, I have the
on,
second
hang on.
question.
I
Yep.
know you do. I think Nick was referring to Jack and getting him to... we'll just try and keep the answers as brief as we can because we are going to run out of people by the time this meeting gets to 4:30 this afternoon. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, regarding pigs, thank you, Councillor. We were very concerned about pigs as a possible vector because pigs obviously are rooting in the soil and rooting around the trees. And so when we started the pig management program, we made the hunters cut off a snout and a trotter of every pig, first 50 pigs they caught, and brought them in for analysis. And we did find a low level of risk, but there was transmission of disease via their snouts and trotters. But we also contracted Massey University to do a study on do pigs digest the disease or do they pass it on, and unfortunately found that, of course, pigs rooting around infected kauri roots, they pick up the disease and unfortunately they don't digest it, so the disease passes through the pig and of course can be deposited many kilometres away. So pigs have really had their status as a vector elevated, second only to humans. So that's it. But the good news about the pig program was that so an awful lot of data was collected by it, and we found that as the numbers fell, the condition of the pigs improved, so therefore they had greater litter sizes. But that's straight epidemiology. If any pest will do that. So you couldn't just slacken your efforts off. They had to be retained. It was about $130,000 a year. But the good news was, even though we'd only reduced, we think, pig populations by 70% down to 30%, it doesn't sound that good, but we reduced the incidence of pig rooting, the disturbance, by over 90%, because as the pig numbers fell, the ngahere improved, its condition improved, and the pigs switched to becoming more browsers than rooters, so which meant it was a good news for carrier-dieback vectoring. So we believe the program was achieving over a 90% reduction in risk of pig vectoring the disease. Now that could be improved with a bit more.
Okay, but sorry, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but pigs and rats or deer or whatever, they all have feet, and that's what we're saying the humans are walking around, and so are the pigs and that. So that was my question there. The other one's a little bit of
sorry, there are no deer and there's no goats, and the only vectors really are pigs and people and machinery in the Waitakus.
Rats and possums. Then we've got the contradiction. If we shut everything down, we've just, Auckland the Park's been going for 15, 20 years now, and we're just starting to make headway, and we're getting more and more localised weed programs and pest programs occurring, whether it be Hui or Titirangi or Piha. And if we shut those down, how long will it be before we start to get major problems with pests, especially again? We're just starting to make some progress. I mean, how long would it be before we're back to where we were in that regard? So, the trees are good, but then we're losing all our birds. So,
well, the activity such as Auckland the Park would be what we call a permitted authorised activity, so it wouldn't cease.
It wouldn't be affected.
Under the Rahui, those activities are already being warranted. So those activities are already being permitted under the Rahui by Te Kawerau Maki. There's absolutely no reason to stop pest control activities so long as they comply with the strict biosecurity standards that are being put in place. Yep. Using a legal tool to close the tracks gives you the power to permit anybody to use any activity that you think is appropriate within the forest, but it also gives you the power to stop people doing unpermitted activities. And we feel all of those of us organisations that are standing with Te Kawerau Maki on this side of the line that they have drawn in the sand agree that those activities should continue, and that your opportunity today, councillors, is to take this one step further and use a legal tool. What is missing in this report is the scoping of the controlled area notice, which gives you the costs, which gives you the how to do this. That is completely missing from this report, and that is negligent in this report, that controlled area notice has not been scoped and not been costed and not telling you how to achieve this. Because a lot of the pushback that I've been hearing from politicians is, how can we do this? It's impossible. We can't achieve it. But you actually haven't asked the question of your officers to provide that information for you. And that's what you need to do today.
For a sec, Mel, so let's be really clear. We've got our legal team who will be, when we ever finally get to the item, we've got our legal team here to address exactly those issues, because councillors have been asking that question and our staff are ready to answer that. So I'll go on to Councillor Lee.
Well, thank you. A question to Dr. Waipara. In your report, or your
Councillor Lee,
co-authored,
we just need to be really clear about Dr. Waipara's role in this. He's a co-author of a report, but it's council's report. So we just need to make sure that we're not asking all the questions of Dr. Waipara. We've got our staff when we get to the item to answer those. So back to you.
in the report, the council report, there's a reference to the linear length of tracks. One is 279 kilometres, which appears to be the whole of the ranges in question, and one is 256 kilometres, which appears to be in the regional park. 110 kilometres of those tracks are close to significant areas of kauri, but 146 kilometres, there is no significant kauri presence. Would that be right?
I don't have the maps with me, but that data has come from our aerial and ground truthing surveillance, so yes. We can
also
give you that analysis
Thank
if you'd
you.
like.
In terms of the vector, you have seen a correlationship of tracks and Phytophthora infection, but also a close correlationship with watercourses as well. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. Some of the watercourses are, of course, tracks along the watercourses too. So we can actually tease out standalone catchment areas or watercourses that actually have tracks abutting them as well.
And you're also saying that the pathogen moves itself. Is that correct? It's not just passively carried. It actually is quite dynamic and expansionary.
Correct, yes.
3 metres per organism per year.
So, for example, an infected tree, often the Kauri trees, their roots fuse. So obviously an infected tree with it can actually pass on the disease to its adjacent tree through root fusion. There's also zoospore, which can move through water films, and so with a very localised spread can move to adjacent trees. So there are many factors in the localised spread of Kauri dieback, yes.
Sure. And there are, you say, vast quantities of this organism present. And moving at 3 metres per year each. So even if we're completely locked up the ranges, there's going to be a lot of movement by Phytophthora unless it's dealt with. Would that be correct?
Yes, so there's interest in creating phosphate barriers, for example, as a tool to wall off the infection front, but we can also look to stop the disease being introduced to other stands that don't have the disease yet. So although there will be autonomous movement in those highly entrenched stands like Mangaroa Ridge, there is still areas warranting biosecurity protection and to stop that jump and spread by human assistance.
Could you talk to us a little bit about phosphate, because there's not much reference to it at all in your report?
I think
Phosphate.
Councillor,
Shall we leave that? Okay.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
we might go into
Okay,
that
thank you.
in the item. I'm just trying to kind of triage what questions are actually going to be common to both sides of these. Councillor Cooper, last question.
I just wanted to ask the questions about the water as a vector. Acknowledging that foot traffic is huge in the spread. So in terms of waterborne carrying of the spores, for example, I had some people talking to me about that do run on the tracks and saying in the bad weather they can just see water pouring across the tracks all over. Is that one of those things that we just can do nothing about?
Yes, so the hydrology of the tracks is really critical because a lot of that water is full of slurry, so it's it's the water and the soil particles within it. There's also the at least the zoospore is a poor swimmer and doesn't survive. It has a very short life cycle, so it will be killed quite quickly. But yes, the slurry of water and mud along those tracks will be a delight for something like a Phytophthora.
The answer, of course, is to upgrade the tracks and pour your money into upgrading the tracks to make them dry. That solves that problem.
And that's a good point at which I think to say thank you to the group, because that's exactly at the heart of what our options discussion is about. So I'd like to move that we thank our 3 presenters, seconded by Councillor Casey. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we've got 2 more presentations to go. I'm just going to ask Pip. Now, Pip, is it Madis or Madis? Madis. So, warm welcome. And right, the next 5 or so minutes is yours. And